as the Syrian conflict continues. With cities being bombed and people being killed indiscriminately, survivors are haunted by two choices. Either remain here and risk facing gruesome, violent deaths, or leave now for a foreign place. Blindly trusting in the smugglers you paid to do their jobs, constantly looking over your shoulder in the dark, hoping that immigration control does not detain and deport you back to where you came from. The choice becomes much easier when one witnesses one's own friends, families, and small children slaughtered like animals. And like any parent, nothing else is more important than the child's safety. Bringing whatever was left, they moved to Turkey, the first of many stops, in hopes to settle in a new home, despite knowing that their identity, culture, and language would not be shared. As the smuggler crammed them onto a rubber dinghy, they prepared themselves against the black, raging waters of the Mediterranean Sea under the moonlit skies. The fear of death never left them, if only for a short while, to be replaced by a persistent anxiety, her mind constantly alternating between fear of being caught and fear of losing the children in the dark. From ferries to trains, one bus to the next, a taxi, or a long hot walk with bags and children in tow. Relocating from one campsite to the next, regardless of the hot, humid summer and the cold, arid winter. Every step forward brings her closer to the epiphany that the life left behind is now impossible to return to. Any small blunder can be disastrous. Wrong directions, a dishonest smuggler, or one overly cautious immigration officer can put an end to any hopes of a new life. Arrested on foreign land, unable to respond, what few possessions were seized, children separated, crammed in a detention center. Dara and Narleen were lucky. They and their children were released 3 days later, safely arriving in the Netherlands and rejoining her refugee group shortly. But for some, it didn't end well. Those entering Europe through this border between Belarus and Poland are not so lucky. Unaware of the crossfire they are now caught between these two nations. Many arrived here without water, food, or medical aid, living in camps like this one during the brutal winter. Like Narleen, many refugees entering Europe usually do so from countries located along the Mediterranean Sea. When countries further north, such as Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, reported a sharp increase in refugees crossing their landlocked borders. Something doesn't add up. It'll be riskier for refugees because they will have to cross more borders illegally to get here. On a closer look, you can see it occurring along Belarus's entire border with the EU. And the reason this border created yet another humanitarian crisis is because of one leader. Belarus's first and ruling president for 26 years, Europe's last dictator, Alexander Lukashenko. In a few months, the authoritarian Belarusian leader lured thousands of Middle Eastern migrants and would-be asylum seekers to Belarus on a promise of easy access into the European Union. Refugees were given special tourist visas and flew directly into Minsk and were bused to Belarus's western border, where they were housed in open, unprotected makeshift campsites as winter approached. But as refugees try to cross these borders in Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, tear gas, water cannons, and rubber bullets greeted them. The Polish blockade meant they had to return to Belarus, even though international human rights laws protect asylum seekers. With a humanitarian crisis right on their doorstep, EU leaders are in a stressful and challenging position. As they now contemplate this evolving crisis with the media broadcasting the actions of Lukashenko, they seem to miss an important point. What's happening in Belarus's border is nothing new. 50 years ago, India accused Pakistan of a refugee invasion after an estimated 10 million refugees migrated into India from then East Pakistan. Even the US has been a frequent target. From the 1950s to the time of George W. Bush, migrants from Cuba, Nicaragua, and Haiti continue to put pressure on the US to this day. Lukashenko's tactic demonstrated two things. One is how little Western governments understand the tactic to this day. Two, how it plays on the contradictory and hypocritical politics of migration in advanced democratic nations. Weaponizing refugee migration has long been a distressingly effective political weapon and isn't going away anytime soon. In a nutshell, using migrants as a political tool is state-level blackmail used to achieve geopolitical and foreign policy goals. Despite the 1951 Refugee Convention granting the right to seek refuge from political persecution, at least 81 documented instances of weaponized migration occurred. Those that use it are often authoritarian regimes that employ it against advanced liberal democracies. The objectives are diverse, from financial gains to political power or even military programs. Pakistan's leader in the early 1980s, Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq, agreed to host 3 million Afghan refugees, many of whom helped the US fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, in exchange for resumption of Pakistan's nuclear weapons program. In the 1990s, the Albanian government got food, economic, and even military aid from Italian special forces in exchange for stopping Albanians from moving to Italy. In 1994, exiled Haitian President Jean-Bertrand Aristide coerced a hesitant United States to reinstate his position by threatening a mass migration of Haitians to the United States. Surprisingly, almost 3/4 of all weaponized migrations were able to reach at least some of their goals. In contrast, armed conflicts and sanctions are not nearly as effective. The idea of using weaponized migration is very appealing, since it is highly likely to achieve outcomes for the user. But that doesn't mean that any refugees trying to find a better place to live or running away from violence and destruction are considered weaponized migrants. More often than not, just the mention of organized migration is enough to obtain quick concessions from nations. For the longest time, the EU gave in to threats over a flood of African migrants. Turkey's president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has repeatedly threatened to allow mass migrations of Middle Eastern refugees into the EU for the last decade. And in 2016, he infamously received financial aid, resumed EU admission discussions, and potentially visa-free travel for Turkish citizens into the EU. Many countries perceive this as an easy payout when EU member states are vulnerable to such manipulation. This is because either outcome of dealing with the migrant influx has negative outcomes, accepting migrants at the risk of domestic political backlash or rejecting migrants at the risk of violating international humanitarian law. This effectively levels the foreign policy playing field against more powerful nations. Often this opens up spaces for negotiations that would not have existed otherwise. Even if the first attempts to force people to concede don't work, having a lot of migrants right next door can change people's minds quickly. This is why targeted governments often concede to such demands. And it's not just the reputational and political damages at stake. Surrendering to the blackmailers only reinforces their ability to manipulate them yet again. More recently, the EU's concessions to Libya and Turkey only emboldened them further. The fact that the Europeans have paid these nations for extended durations to accommodate ever larger numbers of refugees means their threats should be taken seriously. In some cases, they may even partially or completely outsource the handling of refugees. But that may not end well. Nations that have agreed to stop migration flows on behalf of other countries typically use this to demand more benefits. The EU's questionable deal with Libyan militants is a great example of this, where Libyan militants are given control over EU-funded detention centers to stop migrants from entering Europe. Unfortunately, militants are now using the same group of detained migrants as a weapon to force the EU to give in to their demands. The final approach is to take military action against the weaponizer, but this is costly, with uncertain outcomes. Even if an armed conflict forces a regime change, the displacement of war refugees may be greater than the initial threats. Ironically, the success of weaponizing refugees lies in the fact that politicians fail to remember the lessons learned from its past usage. Even though weaponized migration is not new, they see each occurrence as a new form of blackmail in a new confrontation. Often, those demands were made by the same coercers and policymakers who, in retrospect, were baffled by their own short-sightedness. Understanding its history, its successes and its failures will help policymakers come up with better countermeasures. One is to start negotiations early in the confrontation, as weaponizing migrants is rarely a first resort. It's most likely to be used when coercers feel that their concerns are dismissed by their counterparts. Proactive diplomacy will de-escalate the confrontation and avoid creating a humanitarian crisis in the beginning. Unfortunately, Western governments are unlikely to adopt a diplomatic approach with authoritarian regimes. Just look at the relationship between the US and North Korea. Ultimately, the best way to disarm weaponized migration is to integrate the migrants. By receiving and processing refugees without making any concessions, the sending nation loses all perceived leverage. Naturally, the governments will have to preemptively manage and change negative perceptions of migrants held by citizens. This can be done by giving money to the communities, regions, or states where the migrants are expected to live. Indeed, as many EU members demonstrated during Russia's invasion of Ukraine, many Ukrainian war refugees received warm receptions and quick aid from citizens. Sadly, most liberal democratic nations are unlikely to change their strategy. On the contrary, they are running in the opposite direction, tightening immigration laws and asylum policies, and further reducing their legal duties to protect refugees. These tendencies have only escalated with the rise of populist nationalism. What is different about the Belarusian border migrant crisis than past weaponized migrations is that it exposes the contradictory realities of the current global order in a visible and dramatic way. As the world becomes more intricately interconnected, most countries still continue to segregate, label, and group people according to their nationalities or skin colors, despite the fact that the movements of goods, services, and money are now treated as global issues. And this made migrant exploitation so effective as a blackmailing tool for decades that coercers have repeatedly exploited it. The fact that people in power have targeted and exploited some of the world's most vulnerable people is nothing short of inhumane. These refugees, who bore the trauma of losing homes and loved ones in some of the world's most oppressive regimes, are forced to take an uncertain journey with almost nothing but a glimpse of a better future for their children. In a very sad twist, they are turned away by the very same countries that have rapidly declining birth rates.
But you are under arrest for illegal entry to Canada now. Do you understand?
This rejection fuels anti-immigrant policies and populist nationalism in developed countries, undermining the human rights and freedoms that propelled them to prosperity in the past. This does not bode well for liberal democratic societies or the vulnerable migrants in desperate need of protection. If this continues, weaponized migration will become a prevalent symptom of a declining global migration regime with destabilizing, self-reinforcing effects.